Last week we finished up with talking about the essentially some of the lust. Sorry, and I mentioned that there's a place you can go in the um, Mishnah called the Nida for certainly a lot more information on the on on what they mean and so forth. But it was a little too graphic um, for here. But as we go to Matthew chapter 5, we are on. As my computer catches up here. Come on now. There it goes. Matthew chapter 5. Also opening up a software called Safari. If you've not dabbled in Safari, I really highly encourage it. You can also download it have it on your phone. It's like having a Jewish library at your fingertips. It's pretty incredible. Um, but we are on verse 31. Maybe I can scroll down there. It's Sefaria. And I believe it's Sefaria.org. Yes. So in verse 31 and 32, we get into the subject of divorce. So last week we talked about, like I said, we were talking about the things that cause us to sin and adultery and lust and so forth. That it is hyperbolic to say, as essentially what Messiah is saying here, that throw it away, cut it out, because it's to emphasize the seriousness of sin. And then we move on to similar subject, but a little bit different. He goes on to 31 and 32, saying that it was said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a get. But I tell you that anyone divorces his wife except on the ground of fornication makes her an adulteress, and that anyone who marries a divorcee commits adultery. And this is really kind of an interesting elaboration that Messiah speaks on. And for some reason my computer is just kind of being slow today. Let me see if I can do it. Have a secondary option just in case. So this passage that he's referring to is Deuteronomy chapter 24. Deuteronomy 24. Okay, and so speak specifically to this passage. It says, suppose a man marries a woman and consummates the marriage, but later finds her displeasing because he has found her offensive in some respect. He writes her a divorce document, gives it to her, and sends her away from his house. She leaves his house, goes and becomes another man's wife, but the second husband dislikes her and writes her a get, gives it to her, and sends her away from his house. Or the second husband whom she marries dies. In such cases, her first husband who is sent away may not take her again as his wife because she is now defiled. It would be detestable to Adonai, and you are not to bring about sin in the land. Adonai, your God, is given you as an inheritance. Now, the word get is pretty familiar. Most people may know what that is. That's the divorce decree that is done before some judges. So you go to a court in order to get a get, and in that get, they kind of go through and see if there's something to reconcile that divorce, or if there's actually merit for a reason for divorce would probably be the better way. But there's a passage or a set of words that we don't really see so much. It's really loosely translated into the English. Um, Here, where in the first one where it says finds her displeasing because he has found her offensive in some respect. Well, that passage or that idea comes from here in the Hebrew called the Ervat Devar. And I'll show it to you here in just a second. And that Ervat Devar is something that's been of quite a bit of debate. And so it's these two words here. If you can see my mouse on the bottom, it's Ervat Devar. And Devar is actually means words, if you will. And he gives, and he has this Ervat Devar with her. And this is kind of something that's I think at times sort of difficult. But I want to share some thoughts from a friend of mine's commentary. His name is now I'm putting myself on the spot. Uh, Goes by the name Zeus, and I believe he's actually French, if I remember right, is his first language. So if there's a little bit of some English typos, forgive me. But he did some research on this and pulled from a number of sources that I will quote as we go. It says, when a man takes a wife and is intimate with her, and it happens that she does not find favor in his eyes, because he discovers her in her ervat davar, as I mentioned before, that's the word that's of debate here. He will write for her a bill of divorce and place it into her hand and send her away from his house, quoting Deuteronomy 24:1. The first century schools of Shammai and Hillel had different opinions on the meaning of the expression ervat davar. Erva means nudity, or is often translated as nudity or pudenda, but it also means shame or disgrace. The school of Shammai understood here that a man should not divorce his wife unless he has found some unseemly thing in her, while the school of Hillel says that anything that causes shame or disgrace to her household is a reason for divorcement. They even go as far as saying, even if she burnt his meal. This is the debate by the rabbis found in Mishnah Gittin 90a. Rashi seems to interpret, so Rashi is a more modern rabbi. Rashi seems to interpret here that ervat davar means an unseemly moral matter. In the Torah, uncovering the erva of a woman is an idiom for cohabiting with her. Leviticus 18:6. So it is proper for Yeshua to deduce that ervat davar means a matter of fornication or sexual immorality. Yeshua is making use of his Hasidic standards to discourage divorce by saying that a man should not divorce his wife except for the case of sexual immorality, and any other reason makes the certificate of divorce invalid, therefore causing both the woman and the man to fall in her and the man who marries her to fall in adultery. God doesn't want divorce for his children, but he had to provide this measure in the Torah because of human weakness, referring to Matthew 19, 7-9, which talks about the for the stiffness of your neck that Moses gave a writ of divorce. Yeshua refers to the ideal standards in which the kingdom of heaven should be working on earth, which is called midat hasadut, the way of the pious. Someone who lives according to the Hasidim must be careful with matters to cause damage and with ethical principles, coming from Bava Kama 30a, and we'll read from Bava Kama more later. That's a book out of the Mishnah, as well as the Talmud. We must take into consideration that Yeshua's rules here are ethical principles for his disciples. But the Jewish law follows Hillel's lenient approach on this subject, and therefore divorcement is still sad but legally permitted reality in most cases. It also must be taken into consideration that Torah provides other reasons for divorcement. For instance, it allows a woman to divorce her husband when he fails to provide her with food raiment, or proper cohabitation. Exodus chapter 21, 10 through 11. And so it's kind of, I want to bring that part up as well because it's kind of a two-way street. It's not just because he decided he didn't like her anymore. There's also obligations that he needs to be fulfilling in order um, for her. If he doesn't, then he too is in violation, and she can go to the court and ask for a writ of divorce as well. And so I want to read that passage just for fairness, equality, if you will, as the quote unquote common vernacular is. So in verse 10 and 11 of Exodus chapter 21, it says, if he marries another wife, he is not to reduce her food, clothing, or marital rights. If he fails to provide her with these things, she is to be given her freedom without having to pay anything. Giving the opportunity that if he is not fulfilling the obligation to her, then she is able to separate as well. So now if we go back to Matthew chapter 5 and go on to the next passages, 33 through 37. So again, you have heard that our fathers were told, do not break your oath and keep your vows to Adonai. But I tell you not to swear at all, not by heaven, because it is God's throne, not by the earth, because it is his footstool, and not by Jerusalem, because it is the city of the great king. And don't swear by your head, because you cannot make a single hair white or black. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything more than that has its origins in evil. Again, what we see Messiah saying here is certainly in agreement with the sages or the rabbis. So if we go to Numbers chapter 30, be verse 3 if you have a complete Jewish Bible, verse 2 if you have a Christian canonized Bible. But it says, when a man makes a vow to Adonai or formally obligates himself by swearing an oath, he is not to break his word, but is to do everything he said he would do. Let's look at Leviticus chapter 19. Looking at verses 35 to 37. It says, don't be dishonest with measuring lengths, weight, or capacity. Rather, use an honest balance scale, honest weights, an honest bushel, dry measure, and an honest gallon liquid measure. I am Adonai your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Observe all my regulations and rulings and do them. I am Adonai. So he's telling us again, and even here in Leviticus 19, that making sure that when we say it's a bushel, it's a bushel. So not only is should our yes be a yes, but our measurements when we do business should be the same way. Because why? Because he is Adonai, and we represent him as his servants. And so our measurements and the things that we say should be true. Ramchal is a Italian rabbi who moved from Italy to Akko. If you ever get a chance to go to Israel, there's a great little synagogue. One of my favorite places to go that I've been to in Israel is his synagogue that he built in Akko. And he writes, based upon these two passages, he says, your no should be righteous and your yes should be righteous. This is an honest reply when righteousness implies integrity and objectivity. Pretty straightforward, and I think simple enough. But here's some other verses to go along with what we're saying here. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 11. No. Oh, this goes to some of the other parts of that passage. Sorry. Do not swear by anything. So in Deuteronomy 5:11, it says, "You are not to misuse the name of Adonai your God, because Adonai will not leave unpunished someone who misuses or misappropriates his name." So we shouldn't swear by it either. So Leviticus chapter 19. Verse 12, "Do not swear by my name falsely, which would be profaning the name of your God. I am Adonai." Exodus chapter 20. Verse 7 says, "You are not to use lightly the name of Adonai your God, because Adonai will not leave unpunished someone who uses his name lightly." So all this still fits with what Yeshua was saying, Messiah was saying, in that, don't swear by heaven, don't swear by his throne, all these other things, don't take his name lightly. But it really boils down to our own integrity, our own character, and whether what we say is going to be true. Now let's go to so whenever you deal with like judicial matters and so forth, you'll see that in the Mishnah or Talmud, there's 3 books. And this one, you have Baba Batra, Baba Kama, and Baba Metzia. Metzia is the middle of the 3. And let's go to that one because I want to read a quote for you about what the rabbis say. So this is coming from Baba Metzia 49, 49a, verse 6. The Gemara raises an objection. Rabbi Yossi, and son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, "What is the meaning then when the verses states, 'An ephah and just a hin shall you have,' referring to Leviticus 19:36. But wasn't a hin included in an ephah? Why is it necessary to state both? Rather, this is an allusion that serves to say that you say to you that your yes, a hin, should be just, and your no should also be just. Apparently, it is a mitzvah for one to fulfill his promises." Abaye says that verse means that one should not say one matter with his mouth and think another matter in his heart. It is prohibited for one to make a commitment that he has no intention of fulfilling. Rav Kahana made his commitment in good faith and reneged due to changed circumstances. That is not prohibited. So the story goes that there was so Rav Kahana was told somebody he was going to go get something, and with the money that he was given. So let's just say, I don't know, Doug, I give you $5 to go get a well, let's see, I don't know what rice milk is now. Let's say I give you $10 to get 3 dozen of eggs, right? Well, you go there, and obviously you can't buy 3 dozen of eggs for $10. But you come back with, but even though you told me you'll go get 3 dozen eggs, not knowing that the prices had changed. Well, when you get there, you have $10, and now you can get 18, a dozen and a half for $10, and so you come back. Now, that's not against, he didn't violate his word when that happens, because it was based upon the intention of doing it, but circumstances changed without either my knowledge or your knowledge, even though we do know that. But you are not able to fulfill, and it's not like a failure to his vow. That's not doesn't mean that he broke his word. He did everything he could that was possible. So it's sort of like it creates a little bit of a gray area, but I wanted to just kind of share that again, they're saying you should fulfill it within the best of your abilities. And Messiah is not saying anything different in that, saying that let your yes be yes and your no be no, and everything you can fulfill those things, fulfill those vows, as we mentioned from the other passages in Scripture, whether it's equal measurements and stuff, the things that are within your control. You know, we do that. We are called to do the best we can with what we have. Now we move on to 538. You have heard that our fathers were told eye for eye, tooth for tooth. We'll stop right there for because we got a lot of verses to cover from that passage. Okay, so the first place that this is referring to is Exodus chapter 21. Exodus chapter 21, verse 24. And so it says eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. And if we go to Leviticus 24, verse 19, it says, if someone injures his neighbor, what he did is to be done to him. Break for break, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Whatever injury has caused the other person is to be rendered to him in return. And this is interesting because, you know, if we take this literal, then that kind of creates a little bit of a difficulty. What do I mean by that? Well, let's just say a blind man accidentally swings something and knocks out an eye of a regular person. How do you take the eye of someone who's blind? Right? I mean, I'm just kind of putting a plain example. So it is to be understood that this was never to be made or taken literal. In fact, it is it's actually contrary, because if we were to do that, wouldn't that be classified as taking vengeance? Right? That would be classified as taking vengeance. Instead, we should glean here that Adonai is a just God, and there are consequences to our actions, and that retribution and punishment must commiserate the crime, meaning that there should be a balance. Now, what can we learn from this? Well, back to our Bava books, as I joke about them, because all three of them start with Bava, and so this one is called Bava Kama. Again, these are books about kind of different types of justice. And so in 83b, I want to read some verses for you. 83b. And we're going to read verses 1 through 8. So just to kind of give you an idea, Mishnah is a set of books that would have been around during Messiah's time. Gemara, there's some debate. Some of it would have been there during that time, some of it written later. But the thoughts of the rabbis at this time would have been prevalent around this time period anyway. So Mishnah, one who injures another is liable to pay compensation for that injury due to 5 types of indemnity. He must pay for damage, for pain, for medical costs, for loss of livelihood, and for humiliation. There's 5 areas that it is quantified monetarily. And so now it explains how is payment for damage assessed. If one is blinded, another's eye, severed his hand, or broke his leg, or caused any other injury, the court views the injured party as though he were a slave being sold in the slave market, and the court appraises how he much he was worth before the injury and how much he is worth after the injury. And the difference between the two is the sum is these sums is the amount that one must pay for causing damage, which is interesting because that's very similar to how our court sort of assesses that today. And yet we have this from Messiah's time here um, in the Mishnah. Now, how is payment for pain assessed? If one burned another with a skewer or with a hot nail, or if one burned another on his fingernail, which is a place where he does not cause a bruise, that would affect the victim's value on the slave market. The court evaluates how much money a person with a similar threshold for pain as the victim is willing to take in order to be able to um, in order to be made to suffer in this way. The one who burned the victim must then pay this amount. So again, it's a way to calculate these values. Now we go on to the next one. How is payment of medical costs? Well, if one struck another, then he is liable to heal him by paying for his medical costs. In case where growths, blisters, or rashes appeared on the injured party, if the growths are due to the blow, the one who struck him is liable. If the growths are not due to the blow, the one who struck him is exempt, which makes sense. This is, keep in mind, this is Second Temple Times writing, that they're developing these concepts that we take for granted. I don't want to say take for granted, but that we use still today. In the case where the wound healed and then reopened and healed again and then reopened, the one who struck him remains liable to heal the injured party by paying for his medical costs, as it is apparent that the current wound resulted from the original injury. If the injury fully healed fully, the one who struck him is not liable to heal him by paying for the subsequent medical costs. How is payment for the loss of livelihood assessed? The court views the injured party as though he were a watchman of cucumbers, and the one who caused him injury must compensate him based on the pay scale for the income that he lost during his convalescence. This indemnity does not take into account the value of the standard of wages of the injured party, because the one who caused him injury already gave him compensation for his hand or compensation for his leg, and that compensation took into account his professional skills. And finally, the fifth one. I'm sorry. How is humiliation assessed? It all depends on the stature of the one who humiliates the other and the one who is humiliated. So again, they do some calculations here. The Gemara asks, why does the Mishnah take for granted the fact that one who caused injury is liable to pay compensation to the injured party? The merciful one states in the Torah, an eye for eye, as we read earlier in Exodus 21. You might say that this means that the one who caused injury, you might say that this means that the one who caused injury shall lose an actual eye rather than pay money. So he's saying, what about the literal translation, if you will? The Gemara responds that interpretation should not enter your mind. So they're saying that our interpretation of a literal sense of eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and so forth should not enter our mind. The principle implicit in the Mishnah is derived from a verbal analogy in the Torah, as it is taught in kind of outside teachings as a Bareta, based on the verse, an eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, and a foot for foot. One might have thought that if one blinded the eye of another, the court blinds his eye as punishment. Or if he severed the hand of another, the court severs his hand. Or if one broke the leg of another, the court breaks his leg. Therefore, the verse states one who strikes a person, and the verse also states, and one who strikes an animal, to teach that just as one who strikes an animal is liable to pay monetary compensation, so too who strikes a person is liable to pay monetary compensation. So again, just kind of saying this law that we're reading is about just compensations, as I stated earlier, that Adonai is a just God, and there are consequences to our actions, and that retribution and punishment must be must commiserate with the crime. It should be balanced. You don't get to take vengeance. It's just, this is what it is. This is what you do to make it right. Is basically the long summary short. So then we go on to what Messiah says after this. He says, "But I tell you not to stand up against someone who does you wrong. On the contrary, if someone hits you on the right cheek, let him hit you on the left cheek too. If someone wants to sue you for your shirt, let him have your coat as well. And if a soldier forces you to carry his pack for 1 mile, carry it for 2. When someone asks you for something, give it to him. When someone wants to borrow something from you, lend it to him." Press the wrong button. So let's go to um, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. This is a passage that we've read, say part of every week. And I'm looking at verse 18. Let's start in verse 17. "Do not hate your brother in your heart, but rebuke your neighbor frankly, so that you won't carry sin because of him. Don't take vengeance on or bear a grudge against any of your people. Rather, love your neighbor as yourself. I am Adonai." What I found funny, or found, I shouldn't say funny, what I found interesting as I was studying this passage out of Matthew chapter 5, I found that perhaps Messiah was actually quoting from the book of Lamentations, Lamentations chapter 3. Starting in verse 25. It says, "Adonai is good to those waiting for him, to those who are seeking him out. It is good to wait patiently for the saving help of Adonai. It is good for a man to bear the yoke from his youth. Let him sit alone in silence. When he has laid it up on him, let him submit absolutely. There may yet be hope. And then let him offer his cheek to the one who strikes it and receive his fill of insults." Interesting passage. But again, sounds a little bit similar to what Messiah was saying. Now, if we go to Yoma, which is another book in the Mishnah, let's go to 22b. Actually, I'm going to do 23a. Where basically what I'm looking for is the last verse before that. So we know who's speaking because it doesn't give us that. But the verse before it says, "Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehozadak, any Torah scholar who does not avenge himself and bear a grudge like a snake when insulted is not considered a Torah scholar at all." Let's read that again. So it says, any Torah scholar who does not avenge himself and bear a grudge like a snake when insulted is not considered a Torah scholar at all, as it is important to uphold the honor of Torah and its students by reacting harshly to insults. The Gemara asks, "But isn't it written, explicitly in the Torah, you shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, referring to Leviticus 19:18, which we read earlier. The Gemara responds that prohibition is written with regard to monetary matters and not personal insults. As it was taught, again, in a outside teaching, what is revenge and what is bearing a grudge? Revenge is illustrated by the antivirus spider. Revenge is illustrated by the following example. One said to his fellow, "Lend me your sickle," and he said, "No." The next day he, the one who had refused to lend the sickle, said to the other person, "Lend me your axe." If he said to him, "I will not lend to you, just as you did not lend to me," that is revenge. And what is bearing a grudge? If one said to his fellow, "Lend me your axe," and he said, "No," and the next day he, the one who had refused to lend the axe, said to the other man, "Lend me your robe." If the first one said to him, "Here it is, as I am not like you, who would not lend to me," that is bearing a grudge. Although he does not respond to his friend's inconsiderate behavior in kind, he still makes it known to his friend that he represents his inconsiderate behavior. This teaching shows that the prohibition relates only to monetary matters, such as borrowing and lending. The Gemara asks, but does the prohibition against vengeance really not relate also to matters of personal anguish suffered by someone? Wasn't it taught in a teaching, those who are insulted but do not insult others, who hear themselves being shamed but do not respond, who act out of love for God, and who remain happy in their suffering, about them, the verse states, "They that love him be as the sun when it goes forth in its might." Judges 5:31. This teaching shows that one should forgive personal insults as well as wrongs in monetary matters. So we take all those things and come back to Matthew chapter 5. And I think a lot of it supports and backs up and says that he didn't teach anything different. But when he says, "But I tell you to not stand up against anyone who does you wrong. On the contrary, if someone hits you on the right cheek, let him hit you on the left cheek also." Maybe referring to Lamentations chapter 3. If someone wants to sue you for a shirt, let him have your coat as well. If a soldier forces you to carry his back for 1 mile, carry for 2. When someone asks you for something, give it to him. When someone wants to borrow something, lend it to him. Basically, I think another way to summarize this is don't be so caught up litigiously that you want to just litigate everything. Be gracious. And it reminds me of a story of someone who, a friend of mine was sharing the story with me, and he was out for a walk with a friend, and they were walking around in a park and so forth, and they came upon a homeless person who was begging for money, who was asking for money, a panhandler, if you will. And so, my friend stopped and felt compelled, felt that he should offer him or give him some money. And so he took some money out and gave it to the panhandler and gave it to him. And his friend looked at him and he goes, "How do you know that he's going to use that money for food or whatever he's saying that he's actually needing it for?" And my friend just turned and looked to him and said, "Well, that's between him and God, because that was God's money. And what he does with it is now between him and God. I felt compelled to give it to him. So what he does with it is now, it's not really my matter. That was God's money that I gave to him. And now what he does with it is between him and God." And so there's not a quick, like, "Oh, you did this to me." No, if you feel if you are close to the Lord, walking with the Lord, and you're having some of these things, we should be gracious with one another. I don't think Messiah is certainly not saying that we should be doormats, because there's no justice in being a doormat, right? Get walked all over. There's no justice in being a doormat. That's not what he's saying. But instead, that when somebody is in a position that wants to do something to you, show them that you know, be gracious. Be gracious in return. And if you did something wrong, or in the case of the shoulder, they make them do that. If he's going to force you to do one, have the spirit of saying, well, no, I'll take it for two. Be willing to do more and be a little bit different in that regards.